When we talk about learning English, sometimes we think it has to be difficult or filled with long, complicated sentences, but in reality, it is often the simplest stories that make the biggest difference. Imagine listening to two friends having a friendly conversation, sharing their thoughts, laughing, and supporting each other. This kind of simple exchange is not only easy to understand, but also enjoyable to follow. That's exactly what happens when we listen to the story of Lisa and Ellie. Their conversation is not filled with heavy words or difficult grammar. Instead, it is warm, light, and relatable, and that's what makes it so effective for learners. One of the most powerful aspects of this story is the natural flow of the dialogue. You can feel the friendship between the two characters. They don't rush, they don't over-explain, and they don't use words that sound unnatural. Instead, they speak the way real friends do in everyday life. This is important because when we hear English spoken in a natural rhythm, it becomes easier to catch the meaning without having to stop and translate every single word. The simplicity of their talk creates a kind of comfort zone for the listener, a safe space to absorb new words and expressions without pressure. The story highlights how even a small moment of interaction can turn into something meaningful. Lisa is preparing for a trip, and her excitement shines through her words. Ellie, being a supportive friend, responds with encouragement but also with a playful laugh. This exchange feels real, and that realism is what draws the listener in. Learners can imagine themselves in the same position, chatting with a friend about plans, laughing about little things, and feeling understood. It's more than just a lesson in English. It's a reflection of human connection. Another important thing to notice is how emotions are carried through the dialogue. When Lisa says she's ready for her journey, you can almost hear her energy and curiosity. When Ellie reminds her about research and writing, it doesn't sound like a lecture. It sounds like advice from someone who truly cares. This mix of excitement, encouragement, and humor makes the conversation easy to follow and enjoyable. For learners, connecting with the emotions in the story helps them not only understand the words, but also feel the meaning behind them. Simple stories like this also remind us that learning does not always come from textbooks or formal lessons. Sometimes the best lessons come from listening to how people talk in real life. This story works because it mirrors the way friends usually interact. Short sentences, friendly teasing, shared plans. These are all parts of natural speech. When learners practice listening to such conversations, they begin to pick up on tone, rhythm, and word choice. They start to recognize how English sounds in everyday situations, and that recognition builds confidence. There is also a cultural layer hidden within the simplicity of this conversation. Planning a trip, talking about writing an article, sharing laughter over responsibilities. These are things that people from many backgrounds can relate to. Even if the listener has never traveled to China, they can connect with the excitement of preparing for a journey. Even if they've never written for a school newspaper, they can understand the pride of being part of something meaningful. These universal themes make the story accessible and enjoyable to a wide range of learners. For those who are still building their English, the simplicity of vocabulary makes it less intimidating. Words like trip, report, paper, research, and come are basic, yet when they are placed in context, they become powerful tools for understanding. Learners realize that they don't need to master thousands of difficult words to express themselves. They only need to know how to use simple words effectively in a sentence. This story is a perfect example of how small words, when used naturally, can create a big impact. What makes this story even more valuable is how it can inspire learners to try similar conversations in their own lives. After listening, a student might think, I can talk with my friend about my plans too. Or I can practice asking simple questions and giving encouraging answers. In this way, the story becomes more than just listening practice. It becomes a model that learners can copy and build upon. By repeating these kinds of dialogues, learners slowly move from understanding to speaking, which is the real goal of language learning. The warmth and friendliness in this story should not be overlooked either. It shows that language learning does not have to be cold or mechanical. When two friends talk with kindness, laughter, and respect, they create a space that is comfortable to enter. For learners, this makes all the difference. They are not only practicing English, they are also practicing empathy, humor, and connection, all through simple, everyday speech. And so, this story proves that even the simplest conversations can open doors to understanding, confidence, and genuine enjoyment of English. When we listen to this story, one of the most useful things we notice is how naturally travel, vocabulary, and everyday English expressions are woven into the dialogue. There are no long, complicated words that feel out of place. Instead, the conversation is filled with simple phrases that people actually use when they are planning something exciting like a trip. This is one of the best ways to learn, because instead of memorizing lists of words from a book, we hear them in action, in sentences that feel alive and real. For example, the word trip might sound ordinary, but in this story it carries excitement. When one character says she's preparing for her trip, the word is not just about going somewhere. It's about anticipation, curiosity, and a new adventure. Learners can immediately connect with this because most of us know the feeling of getting ready to travel. The beauty is that such a simple word becomes more memorable when it is tied to a personal experience in the story. Then there is the word report. At first glance, it looks academic, but in the dialogue it is used in a casual way. Writing a report for the school newspaper is not presented as a boring task, but as an opportunity to share experiences. This makes the word easier to remember because learners see it used in a positive, friendly tone. In fact, every time the vocabulary appears, it is carried by the natural warmth of the speakers, and that's what helps it sink in. Expressions like "what do you think?" or "you're right" might sound very basic, yet they are exactly the kind of everyday English that learners need to practice. These phrases show how people agree, confirm, or invite someone else's opinion in a natural conversation. They are short, easy to say, and incredibly useful in daily life. Instead of focusing only on unusual or complex terms, the story shines a light on these practical, real-world expressions that learners can use right away. We also hear expressions of encouragement like China, "Here I come." It's playful, it's light, and it shows how English can carry energy and enthusiasm. This phrase teaches learners that English isn't just about communication. It's also about expressing emotions, building atmosphere, and sharing excitement. Saying something like that adds personality to the way we speak, and that's an important part of learning a language. The story also models how people give advice without sounding too formal. For instance, reminding someone to do research before a trip is practical, but it's said in such a friendly way that it doesn't feel like an order. Learners can take this as an example of how to make suggestions politely and gently in English. It's not just about the words, but about the tone and the kindness behind them. That's the type of lesson that books alone cannot teach. By focusing on travel vocabulary, the story opens up possibilities for learners to imagine their own journeys. They can practice sentences like "I'm planning my trip," "I need to do some research," or "I'm writing about my experience." Each of these phrases connects to real life, making them both easy to learn and enjoyable to repeat. When vocabulary is tied to an interesting theme, like traveling to a new country, it naturally stays in the mind longer. Another subtle but powerful element of the conversation is rhythm. Everyday expressions in English often have a flow, a music of their own. Phrases like "let's hang up now" or "okay, you're right" are short and natural, but when learners hear them, they also start to feel how English is spoken. This rhythm is just as important as vocabulary itself, because it teaches not only what to say but how to say it smoothly. Simple expressions are also the bridge between learners and confidence. Imagine a student trying to speak English for the first time. They might not know advanced grammar, but if they can say, "What do you think?" or "You're right," they already sound natural and engaged. These little everyday expressions empower learners to take part in real conversations, and that is far more valuable than memorizing rare words they might never use. What makes this story special is that travel vocabulary and expressions are not taught in isolation. They are shown in context inside a friendly chat. This is how learners should ideally absorb new language, not as dry information, but as living pieces of dialogue. By hearing and repeating such expressions, learners build not just vocabulary but confidence, and that confidence pushes them to speak more freely in their own lives. So when we listen carefully, we discover that travel vocabulary and everyday English expressions are not just teaching tools. They are bridges to real communication, to confidence, and to making English part of everyday life. There is something truly special about the way excitement comes across in this story. When the character talks about going to China for the first time, you can hear more than just words. You can feel the energy behind them. That excitement is not just about travel, it's about curiosity, discovery, and stepping into something completely new. For anyone learning English, this kind of emotional expression is powerful because it shows how language connects not only with the mind, but also with the heart. The way she speaks about the trip reminds us of the thrill that comes with preparing for an adventure. It's the joy of imagining the sights, the people, the food, and the culture that will be experienced. Even before the journey begins, the anticipation makes the conversation lively. Learners can sense that spark, and it teaches them that English is not only a tool for communication, but also a way to express feelings vividly. Words like "China," "Here I come," carry more than a destination. They carry the spirit of adventure itself. This excitement also shows the natural rhythm of spoken English. Instead of long, formal sentences, the expressions are short, energetic, and real. That's what makes them so easy to learn. A phrase like "I can't wait" or "I'm so ready" is simple but charged with meaning. Learners pick up on that energy and start to see how even the most basic words can create a strong emotional impact. It's a reminder that fluency isn't about using difficult vocabulary. It's about making simple words come alive through tone and emotion. When we hear her excitement, it also teaches us about cultural openness. Going to a place for the first time is always filled with questions and curiosity, but in the way she talks, there is no fear, only enthusiasm. That shows learners that English can be used not just to describe facts, but to share a positive outlook on new experiences. It's not "I will go to China" in a dry tone. It's "China, here I come," with energy. This small shift in delivery changes everything. The excitement about visiting China also brings in natural opportunities for using travel-related words. Talking about research, planning, and preparing fits perfectly into the theme, yet the conversation never feels like a lesson, it feels like real life. Learners hear how travel, vocabulary, and everyday phrases blend into one smooth conversation. Instead of memorizing words like "trip" or "research," they hear them used with genuine enthusiasm, which makes them easier to remember and more enjoyable to practice. There's also something inspiring about the way excitement spreads. When one person talks with passion, the other responds with laughter, encouragement, and a playful tone. This back and forth interaction shows that enthusiasm is contagious. For learners, it's a chance to see how emotion in language creates connection. When someone speaks with excitement, it pulls the listener in, making the conversation more engaging. That is an important lesson. English is not only about clarity, it is also about connection. Travel itself is a theme that almost everyone can relate to, whether or not they have gone abroad. The idea of going somewhere new, experiencing something different, and collecting stories to share is universal. That's why learners can so easily connect with this part of the story. Even if they are not planning to visit China, they can imagine a place they dream of seeing. By practicing English expressions tied to excitement, they can bring their own dreams into words. This story shows that excitement is not just about what is said, but also how it is said. The rising tone, the playful exclamations, the natural pauses, all these small details reveal the rhythm of authentic English speech. Learners don't only hear vocabulary, they hear personality. They start to realize that sounding natural in English is less about perfect grammar and more about letting emotion shape the way words are spoken. Excitement also serves as motivation. When learners listen to someone speak with joy about travel, it inspires them to think of English not as a subject to study, but as a key that opens doors. English becomes the language of travel, of new friendships, of discoveries waiting to be made. The simple enthusiasm in the story is like a spark. It makes learners imagine their own journeys and motivates them to keep improving their language so they can live those experiences more fully. So, when she shares her excitement about visiting China, it becomes more than just a line in a story. It becomes a moment of energy, of anticipation, of joy. And that excitement, captured in simple words, teaches us that English is at its most beautiful when it carries the heart as well as the voice. Would you like me to continue and expand the fourth keynote, Ellie encouraging her to research and write in the same flowing 700-word speech style? One of the most meaningful parts of the story comes when the friend encourages her not only to enjoy the trip, but also to do some research and even write about it afterward. This moment may seem small, but it carries an important lesson about how language and learning are connected to curiosity and reflection. It's not just about traveling for fun. It's about preparing thoughtfully, gathering knowledge, and then sharing that experience with others. That advice, spoken in such a warm and supportive way, adds depth to the conversation and gives learners a chance to hear how encouragement sounds in everyday English. The suggestion to do research before the trip is very natural. When someone is about to visit a new place, there are always questions to explore. What is the culture like? What kind of food will be there? What are the customs and traditions? Asking these questions and looking for answers shows respect and genuine interest in the destination. In English, phrases like "you have to do some research" or "don't you think" come across as friendly reminders rather than commands. This makes the advice easy to accept and easy to practice in other situations. Learners can pick up these expressions and use them in their own conversations, whether it's about travel, study, or any kind of preparation. Encouraging someone to write about their journey is another powerful moment. It's not only about language practice, it's also about reflection. Writing gives a chance to capture feelings, describe experiences, and share memories. In the story, this suggestion is framed with light-hearted humor, but at the same time, it reveals how valuable it is to turn experiences into words. For learners of English, hearing this advice encourages them to practice not only speaking and listening, but also writing, which strengthens the entire learning process. What makes this encouragement stand out is the supportive tone behind it. Instead of being serious or heavy, it's playful, almost teasing, yet filled with genuine care. This shows learners how English can be used to encourage without pressure. Saying something like, "Why don't you write about it?" or "You could share your experience," is gentle, friendly, and motivating. It demonstrates the kind of language that inspires others rather than forcing them. That kind of phrasing is a key lesson for anyone who wants to sound natural and supportive in English. Another layer here is the sense of responsibility that comes through the advice. Writing for a school newspaper or sharing a report adds meaning to the trip. It turns a personal journey into something others can learn from. This is an important idea because language is not only for ourselves, it's also for connection. When we put experiences into words, we allow others to see through our eyes, to imagine what we felt, and to understand a world they may not have seen. In this way, English becomes more than a skill, it becomes a bridge. Encouragement like this also teaches us the balance between fun and learning. Of course, the character is excited about traveling, but the reminder to prepare and reflect brings balance. Learners can see that English conversations are not just about sharing excitement, but also about giving thoughtful advice. This mixture of joy and responsibility makes the dialogue richer and more meaningful. For learners, it models how to talk in a way that is both fun and thoughtful at the same time. Research and writing also open doors to new vocabulary. When someone prepares for a trip, they learn the names of places, foods, traditions, and experiences. When they write, they practice using those words in sentences, making the language stick. The story captures this in a simple way, showing that research and writing are not chores but opportunities to deepen understanding. Learners can see how English grows naturally when it is tied to real experiences and reflections. The act of encouraging also reveals the strength of friendship. When friends support each other's journeys, their words carry weight. That's why this advice does not sound empty. It feels sincere. Learners notice this tone, and they can practice using similar supportive phrases in their own friendships. Saying things like, "That's a great idea," or "You should share that," makes conversations warmer and builds stronger bonds, both in English and in life. What stands out most is how such simple words of encouragement can plant seeds for bigger ideas. A trip becomes more than just travel. It becomes a story to share. A conversation becomes more than small talk. It becomes guidance. And for learners, a story like this becomes more than just practice. It becomes a window into how English expresses care, responsibility, and inspiration. So in this moment of encouragement, we don't just hear advice about research and writing. We hear the power of friendship, the value of reflection, and the way English can carry not only words, but also support, laughter, and hope. One of the most valuable lessons we find in this story is how it promotes listening practice through natural dialogue. For anyone learning English, listening is often the skill that feels the hardest to improve because it requires more than just knowing words. It requires catching tone, rhythm, pauses, and the way people truly speak in everyday life. That is exactly why this story works so well. It doesn't sound like a textbook. It doesn't sound like a lecture. It sounds like two friends sharing a real conversation, and that authenticity is what makes it so effective. When we hear natural dialogue, we notice how the sentences are short, clear, and often playful. Phrases like "What do you think?" or "You're right" come in naturally without being forced. These may seem simple, but they are exactly the kind of phrases that learners will hear again and again in real conversations. Practicing listening to them here means recognizing them quickly later, whether in movies, daily conversations, or even when speaking with native speakers. The repetition of such natural expressions builds both familiarity and confidence. Listening to this type of dialogue also helps learners understand rhythm. In everyday speech, people don't always pronounce every word carefully like they do in lessons. Words connect, sounds blend, and sometimes phrases are shortened. By listening to friends talking casually, learners begin to catch this flow. They start to realize that understanding English is not about hearing each word separately, but about catching the meaning carried by the whole sentence, by the tone, and by the pauses in between. Another benefit of natural dialogue is that it shows emotion. In this story, excitement, laughter, and encouragement all come through in the way the words are spoken. Learners who practice listening to these emotions learn more than just vocabulary. They learn how English sounds when it expresses joy, playfulness, or motivation. This kind of listening goes deeper than just hearing words. It's about feeling the language. That is what makes a learner not just understand English but connect with it. When learners practice listening to natural conversations like this, they also build patience. Unlike scripted lessons, real dialogue doesn't always move in a straight line. People laugh, they pause, they repeat themselves, or they shift topics suddenly. At first, this can seem confusing, but over time it helps learners get comfortable with the unpredictability of real conversations. This prepares them for speaking situations in the real world, where conversations are rarely perfect or predictable. The story also gives learners a safe environment to practice listening. Because the conversation is light, friendly, and not overloaded with difficult words, it allows learners to focus on sound and meaning without feeling overwhelmed. They can listen again and again, catching new details each time. Maybe the first time they hear the main idea, the second time they notice a new phrase, the third time they catch the way the tone changes when the characters laugh. Each repeat listening builds stronger skills without feeling like a burden. Another important point is that natural dialogue helps learners with intonation. English is not just about what we say, but how we say it. In this story, when excitement builds, the tone rises. When advice is given, the tone softens. When humor comes in, the voice lightens. Listening to this teaches learners how to shape their own voice in English, so that their speech carries not only words, but also feelings. This is how listening practice naturally becomes speaking practice as well. For many learners, the biggest struggle is that they can read English much faster than they can understand it when spoken. That's because reading gives time to process each word, while listening happens in real time. Stories like this bridge that gap. By practicing with natural, friendly conversations, learners gradually train their ears to keep up with the pace of real speech. They stop translating in their heads and start understanding directly. That shift is the moment when listening begins to feel natural. Even more, this kind of listening practice builds confidence. When learners realize they can follow a simple, real conversation between two friends, they feel encouraged. They start to think, if I can understand this, I can understand more. That confidence pushes them forward, makes them less afraid of real conversations, and helps them take the risk of speaking more themselves. Listening becomes not just a skill, but a doorway into real communication. So, through this story, listening practice is no longer boring or mechanical. It becomes enjoyable, meaningful, and connected to real life. It proves that listening to natural dialogue is one of the best ways to train the ear, build confidence, and truly step into the rhythm of the English language. One of the greatest outcomes of listening to stories like this is the confidence learners begin to feel in themselves when they realize they can understand real, life conversations. Confidence is something that cannot be memorized from a textbook. It is built slowly, piece by piece, each time a learner listens, understands, and responds without hesitation. And this story provides exactly the kind of practice that leads to that growth. At first, when learners listen to English, they may feel nervous or even discouraged. The words seem fast, the sounds are different, and it feels impossible to catch every detail. But in a simple, natural dialogue like this one, they discover that understanding is possible. They hear two friends talking in a way that is clear and relatable, and suddenly the fear begins to fade. That small moment of success, catching a phrase, understanding a joke, following the rhythm, becomes a spark of confidence. What makes this story so helpful is the realism of the dialogue. It is not an artificial script filled with difficult grammar. It is filled with the kinds of expressions people truly use every day. When learners hear phrases like "What do you think?" or "You're right," they realize they already know more than they imagined. Recognizing these common expressions builds a sense of achievement, and that sense of achievement is the foundation of confidence. The more learners notice familiar patterns in conversation, the more they trust themselves to keep going. Confidence also grows from repetition. Listening once may feel challenging, but listening again brings new clarity. Each time, learners notice something they missed before: the intonation of a question, the humor in a laugh, or the soft tone of encouragement. With each repetition, understanding deepens, and with deeper understanding comes assurance. Soon, learners discover that they are not only following the story, but anticipating what might come next. That moment, when comprehension becomes natural, is when confidence truly blooms. Another way confidence builds is through connection. When learners hear a conversation that mirrors real situations, friends laughing, planning, giving advice, they begin to imagine themselves in those roles. They think, "I could say that, I could ask that question, I could respond in the same way." This visualization is powerful. It shifts learning from being passive to being active. Learners don't just listen. They start to see themselves speaking, and that vision fuels the belief that they can succeed. Confidence also comes from realizing that understanding does not mean catching every single word. In real conversations, even native speakers don't focus on every word. They listen for meaning, for tone, for the overall message. This story teaches learners that it's okay to miss a word here or there, as long as the main idea is clear. That lesson is liberating. It removes the pressure of perfection and replaces it with a sense of progress. Progress, not perfection, is what builds lasting confidence. Another key element is the role of encouragement within the story. When one friend laughs, when advice is given kindly, when excitement fills the words, learners feel part of that atmosphere. They don't just understand the words, they feel the emotions. Realizing they can follow not only what is said, but also how it is said gives them a deeper level of confidence. They are no longer outsiders looking in. They are participants who can sense the flow of natural human interaction. This confidence extends beyond listening. Once learners feel comfortable understanding a simple story, they become more willing to speak. They begin to test themselves, trying out the same expressions they heard, copying the tone, the rhythm, the pauses. Confidence in listening naturally leads to confidence in speaking, because the two skills are connected. Understanding gives the courage to respond, and responding creates the cycle of real communication. The most powerful thing about this kind of confidence is how it changes the learner's mindset. Instead of thinking, "English is too difficult," they begin to think, "I can do this." Instead of avoiding conversations, they start looking forward to them. Instead of staying silent, they take risks, knowing they can handle more than they thought. And all of this begins with something as simple as listening to a short, friendly conversation and realizing they understood. So when learners practice with this story and discover they can follow along, they gain more than listening skills. they gain belief in themselves, and that belief is the true key to growing in English and to stepping with confidence into every real life conversation that lies ahead. Thank you for joining this journey through a simple story that carried friendship, travel, excitement, encouragement, listening practice, and above all, confidence. Every word we heard showed how English can be natural, meaningful, and deeply connected to real life. So keep listening, keep practicing, and step forward with the confidence to make every conversation your own.